All right, ready to explore a fascinating chapter of Roman history. We're talking about Trajan's Dacian Wars.
A lot of people don't know much about these wars.
Yeah, they're kind of overshadowed by some of Rome's other big conflicts, but they were really significant. I mean, they reshaped the Roman Empire in a lot of ways. We want to uncover the whole story, not just the battles and dates. Like, who were the Dacians?
Yeah, good question. They weren't just some random barbarian tribe causing trouble on the edges of the empire.
Right. They often depicted that way, but it sounds like there's more to it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, these guys were skilled metal workers. Almost everyone had a sword. It wasn't just the elites. That tells you a lot about their culture, right?
Definitely a society of warriors.
Yeah.
Makes sense that Rome would have had them on their radar.
Oh, absolutely. Rome was all about controlling potential threats, and Dacia, even before Caesar, was a known entity.
And there was already a history there, right? Didn't Domitian fight a Dacian war back in 89 AD?
He did, and it ended with Rome paying subsidies to the Dacian king, Decebalus. But Decebalus, he was a smart guy. He basically used that Roman money to beef up his own defenses.
Wow, so he was playing the long game, not just accepting a handout, but preparing for the next round.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which leads us to Trajan. He takes the throne, and he's a military man, a strategist. He sees this Dacian situation and decides it's time for a more permanent solution.
But it wasn't just about military dominance, was it? Rome was facing economic anxieties at the time, weren't they? Something about their currency.
You got it. The Roman currency was losing its gold content, and there were all these rumors about Dacia being rich in gold mines.
So a combination of economic pressure and a persistent threat on the border.
A recipe for conflict, for sure. And remember, the Dacians weren't just sitting around waiting. They were raiding Roman colonies, forging alliances with other tribes. It was a powder keg waiting to explode.
Okay, so enter Trajan. 101 AD, he launches his first Dacian campaign.
And he doesn't mess around. Trajan was meticulous in his planning. And the logistics of the Roman army, I mean, it was mind-blowing.
I've read about the bridge he had built across the Danube. Trajan's bridge, right?
Yeah. A massive undertaking, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus, maybe the greatest engineer of the time. Probably the biggest bridge in the world at that point.
They didn't want any obstacles slowing them down.
Nope. Trajan was determined to win and win decisively. And they had some major successes, like the Battle of Tapi.
But Decebalus was no pushover. He managed to negotiate a peace treaty that allowed him to rebuild his forces. So even in defeat, he was still maneuvering.
Always thinking ahead. This is what makes these wars so fascinating. It wasn't just a simple clash of armies. There were these side conflicts, alliances shifting, these hidden currents running beneath the surface. Like the Sarmatian Roxolani tribe.
Right, I remember reading about them. They were allied with the Dacians.
Yep, and they fought their own battles against the Romans, which are often overlooked in the grand narrative. But it shows you how complex this whole conflict really was.
And Decebalus, he didn't stay quiet for long, did he?
Not at all. He was like a poker player, constantly raising the stakes. Broke the treaty, started raiding again, almost daring Trajan to come back for round two.
Which he did, of course.
Yeah.
A few years later, Trajan launches his second Dacian campaign. But this time, it wasn't a walk in the park.
Oh no, the Dacians and their allies, they fought tooth and nail. The Romans won, ultimately, but it was a brutal struggle. Those legions really earned their victory.
The siege of Sarmizegetusa, the Dacian capital, was a turning point, right?
Absolutely. The Romans, they cut off the city's water supply, a classic siege tactic, but incredibly effective. Sarmizegetusa falls, and the Romans discover Decebalus's hidden treasure.
Talk about spoils of war, a hidden treasure. That's got to be a story in itself.
Oh, there's a lot more to unpack there, and we'll get into it. But first, let's talk about the aftermath of these wars. The consequences, the ripple effects that changed both Rome and Dacia forever.
Let's do that.
So those gold mines everyone was talking about, they weren't just rumors. The Romans hit the jackpot there.
A literal gold rush. It must have been a huge boost to the Roman economy.
Oh, yeah, it filled the treasury, let me tell you. And it allowed Trajan to really go all out with his building projects back in Rome.
All those impressive structures, the forums, the markets.
Exactly. And of course, Trajan's Column, that towering monument commemorating his victories in Dacia. It's like he was saying, look what we achieved with all that Dacian gold.
A very tangible symbol of victory. But what about the Dacians themselves? What happened to them after the war?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Rome, they didn't just want to conquer, they wanted to transform. We call it Romanization.
I've heard the term, but what does it actually mean in practice?
Think of it like this. You're a Dacian farmer, minding your own business, and suddenly, bam, your world is flipped upside down. Roman law is in place, you're paying taxes in Roman currency, and Roman goods are everywhere.
Talk about culture shock.
Big time. And it wasn't just about economics. The Romans had a whole system for integrating conquered people into their empire. They built new cities, roads, implemented their own administration. It was a pretty thorough process.
So the Dacians had to adapt or be left behind.
Pretty much. And remember those statistics we talked about earlier about the names?
Yeah, the vast majority being Roman in origin after the war.
It wasn't just names either. Language, religion, education, it was all influenced, sometimes forced, in the Roman direction.
They wanted to make Dacia into a Roman province in every sense of the word.
Exactly. And they were pretty successful, too. But it's not like the Dacians just vanished overnight. There was pushback, especially from those living outside the Roman province, the free Dacians.
Right, those who managed to hold on to their independence.
They never really stopped resisting Roman rule, raids, rebellions. They were a constant thorn in the side of the Roman administration.
So even with this process of Romanization, there was still a strong sense of Dacian identity that wouldn't be erased.
Oh, definitely. And even within the Roman province, there were uprisings. It wasn't all peace and harmony.
Shows you that cultural change is never a simple process, is it? It's messy, it's contested.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes these wars so fascinating to study. It wasn't just about battles and conquests. It was about this clash of cultures, this ongoing struggle between assimilation and resistance.
And those clashes, those struggles, they continued long after the initial conquest. It makes you wonder how those interactions ultimately shaped the region we know today.
How much of Roman Dacia survived, how much of the original Dacian culture remained. It's like a puzzle with pieces scattered across centuries.
Yeah, it makes you think about how much history is hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered.
It really does. And it's not just about digging up artifacts. It's about trying to understand the lives of the people who lived in those times, their stories. Like, what was it like to be a Dacian living through this period of Romanization? What choices did they face? How did they adapt or resist?
Those are questions we can only really speculate about, right? I mean, we have the archaeological evidence, the historical accounts, but there are always gaps in the story.
Right, there are. But I think that's what makes history so intriguing, those gaps, those unanswered questions. It leaves room for interpretation, for different perspectives. And, those gaps invite us to use our imagination to fill in those blanks and connect with the past in a more personal way.
It reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of facts and dates. It's about people, their lives, their cultures, their struggles, their triumphs. It's about understanding the forces that shape the world we live in today.
And it's about recognizing that the past is never truly past. It echoes through time, shaping our present and influencing our future. Like the story of Trajan's Dacian Wars, it's a reminder that even empires rise and fall, cultures clash and blend, and the human spirit, it endures through it all.
And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've journeyed back in time, explored the complexities of these ancient conflicts, and uncovered some fascinating stories along the way.
We have. And if this conversation has piqued your interest, I encourage you to keep exploring, keep digging deeper into the rich tapestry of history.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.